Hi, my name is Shane Matthews, and today we're going to be looking at a case that took place in the United Kingdom. It was codenamed Operation Rhyme. So the beginning of this case is in 2004, where police in the United Kingdom were aware that a significant Al-Qaeda operative was operating somewhere within the country. Eventually, the operative was identified by Scotland Yard and placed under careful surveillance. Arrests could not be executed until an imminent danger was identified and/or significant evidence was acquired. The operative they identified is Doreen Barot. They identified him as a terrorist associated with Al-Qaeda. They know now that he has advanced counter-surveillance skills. He has a lot of mass bombing plans to his name. He also has access to vast amounts of resources. And even with an arrest, they needed time and proof in order to get a good, solid conviction. To add some background to Barot, he was born in Baroda, India in 1971. He moved to the UK at the age of 1 with his family in order to escape violence and discrimination. His family was Hindu, as was he, until he's about 20 when he converted to Islam. Right now, it's unknown as to why he converted to Islam. He was a student at Kingsbury High School, and he worked in Piccadilly for Air Malta from ages 20 to 24. Here we can see how Barot went from sort of a normal man to basically a terrorist. In 1995, Barot moved to Pakistan, taking part in militant campaigns against Indian forces in Kashmir. He gained recognition and notoriety in 1999, authoring a book containing his own methods for disposing of Indian fighters, which was titled The Army of Medina in Kashmir. The book exposes his training with a group called the Mujahideen, based out of Afghanistan, which would be used during his later, more nefarious endeavors. It was later discovered that Barot gained extensive training in the use of weapons, chemicals, and bomb design during his training. Barot later participated in a training camp teaching terrorism in the Philippines, which was led by Jama' al-Islamiyah. After this time in combat and up until his capture, he served as an Al-Qaeda operative. During his time as an operative, he formulated plans for quite a few high-profile bombings in the UK and in the US, which were thankfully never executed. Below we can find some details surrounding the case. On June 15, 2004, Barot was identified and placed under heavy surveillance by Scotland Yard as the Al-Qaeda operative that they had been warned about. It was clear that he had various accounts with different banks and numerous credit cards. Clearly, he had access to abundant resources since he was able to stay so well hidden, which were theorized to be from his connections to the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda. It's unknown if Barot knew that he was being surveyed, but he covered his tracks and disappeared in July of 2004. During the period where he was unable to be found, there was a raid on suspected terrorists in Pakistan, which yielded computers detailing a plan called the Gas Limos Project. This plan was linked back to Barot, determining that he was the plan's mastermind, and it was decided that he would be arrested when he was next located. It's unknown how these computers were accessed by investigators and how they were able to link it back to Barot, but potential methods are discussed later. He was taken into custody on August 3rd, after which the computer forensics investigation began in earnest. Most of the details following were discovered digitally in a computer forensics investigation following the seizure of Barot's computers. August of 2000, Barot travels to the United States to stake out in Case financial centers in New York with another suspect, both posing as tourists. March of 2001, Barot visits the U.S. again, visiting Washington and taking a helicopter tour of Manhattan. Many of his computer files contained building blueprints as well as potential attack vectors, including Washington's World Bank. Some video evidence was hidden at the end of VHS tapes of movies. Some evidence was also contained on encrypted disks, such as CDs and flash drives. Here we have a quick disclaimer on computer forensics used in the case. While computer forensics techniques were undoubtedly used in this case, the government's techniques aren't explicitly divulged in reports surrounding it. However, based on the report's presentation of the way computer evidence was acquired, it can be discerned relatively easily which techniques were used in the case. Additional techniques can only be speculated on, and it cannot be confirmed whether these techniques were actually used within the case. Below are the computer forensics techniques that were definitively used within this case. It is known that the investigators gained access to Barot's systems, as well as systems recovered in a raid in Pakistan which implicated Barot. The methods which the investigators used for accessing these systems, as well as linking the data from Pakistan back to him, are not known for certain and are discussed in a later slide. We know that they used data recovery. It is known that there were deleted files on these systems which were later used as pivotal evidence in Barot's trial and ultimately may have led to a strong conviction. Thankfully, there are a multitude of tools which the investigators may have used for this, but it's unknown which tool they used for certain. Whichever tool they used, they were able to find bits of lost data and recover them to a state of human readability. Below we'll find some techniques which the forensics investigators may have potentially used to access these systems and to investigate them. One such technique would be imaging. It is standard operating procedure for the forensics investigator to create an image of hard drives or any storage medium with an operating system. So it's highly likely that the investigators use this technique in order to create images which they could analyze instead of potentially altering or corrupting data directly on these systems. They may have used a password cracking tool in order to gain access to these systems. So it's also possible that the investigators simply used one of these tools, which allow them to boot into a miniature operating system. From this mini OS, they have the ability to write to the host OS and are able to make changes to integral file system components, such as administrator accounts and their passwords. Another potentially used technique is encryption algorithm identification and reverse engineering for decryption. It's possible that the method used to access Barot's systems was simply mounting the drives to drive images to a computer forensics workstation. However, since it's known that Barot had an understanding of encryption, it's likely that investigators needed to be able to crack encryption on the drives in order to gain access. Another method might be file signature analysis. Regarding the determination that Barot was linked to the gas limos project outlined in the seized computers from Pakistan, it's possible that the computer forensics investigators used advanced file signature analysis techniques to determine the authors of the plans. Here are some of the challenges that investigators faced during the investigation. Barot has a good understanding of encryption technologies. He was able to outmaneuver surveillance teams as he was followed in the early stages of the investigation. This means that he was able to determine when he was being followed by highly trained individuals and then escape them. He was able to stay off the radar digitally and physically, avoiding any type of detection by surveillance teams for months before his capture. To complicate matters, even when it was determined that Barot could pose an immediate threat, there was not enough solid evidence to convict and imprison him for any significant period. A short timeline of only 2 weeks of maximum custody was all investigators had to present something significant in his trial. If this timeline was missed and Barot received little to no imprisonment time, it could have resulted in mass casualties in the near future. After finding the files in Pakistan implicating Barot, he was deemed too dangerous to be allowed to remain on the streets. During this time, Barot was still on the run and surveillance teams couldn't find him, so police decided that the very next time he was spotted, he would be taken into their custody. Darin Barot was arrested relatively peacefully while attempting to get a haircut on August 3, 2004. As mentioned previously, now that he was in custody, there were 2 weeks to gather solid evidence to provide a heavy conviction and sentence. It was during this 14-day period that police were able to obtain more than 300 computers and 1,800 disks, CDs, zip drives, and hard drives, which were investigated using the aforementioned computer forensics techniques. During his trial, Barot faced the below charges as outlined by the People Pill article in my references. Conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit a public nuisance by the use of radioactive materials, toxic gases, chemical and/or explosives. Possessing detailed reconnaissance on the Prudential Building in New Jersey, possessing detailed reconnaissance of the International Monetary Fund headquarters in Washington, the New York Stock Exchange and Citigroup in New York, and 2 notebooks with information on explosives. Barot submitted a guilty plea regarding conspiracy to murder and received a life sentence on November 7, 2006. Unfortunately, the Court of Appeal had his sentence lowered to 30 years in May of the next year, stating that Barot's plot did not amount to an actual attempt and it was uncertain whether it would have succeeded and what the consequences might have been. Here are a few interesting facts regarding the case. There was an absurd amount of physical keys recovered by investigators. The number of keys totaled more than 600 sets. Investigators allocated more than a year trying to determine what the keys unlocked, but were actually only able to find matches for 77 of them. He supposedly had a bride in Thailand, according to his book. He's also never held a proper job since his Air Malta job in his early adult life. This concludes my presentation on Darin Barot and Operation Rhyme. Thank you very much.